Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together in community to immerse ourselves in the words and wisdom of Torah and to immerse ourselves in relationships of Torah as well. And happy Tu B'Shvat to everyone. Tu B'Shvat celebrates the transition point in the calendar of our physical and spiritual lives, emerging out of winter, heading towards spring. We celebrate the return of buds, blossoms, and fruit to our trees and to the tree of life as well, to all of our lives. So again, happy Tu B'Shvat and welcome to everyone to our Torah study. We are in Parshat Beshalach, which you can find beginning on chapter 13 of the book of Exodus, beginning with verse 17. So I'd like to invite everyone at this point, if you'd like to unmute, and then together we can recite our blessing. And then after the blessing, we're going to remute, and then we'll begin sharing turns of reading verses from our Torah. So together, let's say our blessing for the opportunity of this moment. Baruch
atah
Adonai
Elohim melech haolam
Shanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu
la'asot
b'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity of immersing ourselves in words, matters, and relationships of Torah. So again, if everyone will go ahead and remute, and then I'll begin by opening up with our Torah portion, and then I'll invite everyone to have an opportunity to share in the reading of verses as well. So again, we're chapter 13 of the book of Exodus, beginning with verse 17. Now when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer. For God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people round about by way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. Now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt, and Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who exacted an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will be sure to take notice of you. Then you shall carry up my bones from here with you. They set out from Succoth and encamped at Etham at the edge of the wilderness. God went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. And now we're at chapter 14, beginning with verse 1.
As he said, God will be sure to take notice.
And again, if everyone who's not reading, if you could mute, that way we can minimize our background.
Susan.
So let me invite Margot. Would you like to begin reading at the very start of chapter 14?
Sure. 14. The Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Haroth, between Migdal and the sea. Before Baal Zephon, you shall encamp facing the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are astray in the land. The wilderness has closed in on them. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord.
Thank you. And let's pick up from there. Jim and Peggy, would you like to begin reading where it says, and they did so?
Here. Okay. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people and said, what is this we have done, releasing Israel from our service? He ordered his chariot and took his men with him. and took 600 of his picked chariots and the rest of the chariots of Egypt, with officers in all of them. Adonai stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he gave chase to the Israelites. As the Israelites were departing defiantly, the Egyptians gave chase to them, and all the chariot horses of Pharaoh. Oh, his horsemen and his warriors overtook, then encamped by the sea, near Pi Hahiroth, before Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to Adonai, and they said to Moses, Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians, for it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, Have no fear, stand by and witness the deliverance which Adonai will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. Adonai will battle for you. You hold your peace.
Then Adonai said to Moses, Why do you cry out to me? Tell the
What an
Israelites,
ungrateful group.
your rod, lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it, so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians so that they go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his warriors, his chariots and his horsemen. Let the Egyptians know that I am Adonai when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen. The angel of God who had been going ahead of the Israelite army now moved and followed behind them. And the pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took up a place behind them. And it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel. Thus was the cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that the one could not come near the other all through the night.
Thank you both so much. Gary, would you like to read starting there at verse 21?
Thank you. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord led the sea with its strong east wind all night. And he made the sea into dry land, and the waters split. Then the children of Israel came into the midst of the sea on dry land, and the waters were then as a wall from their right and from their left. The Egyptians pursued and came after them, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen in the midst of the sea. It came about in the morning, watch that the Lord looked down over the Egyptian camp through a pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw the Egyptian camp into confusion. And he removed the wheels of their chariots, and he led them with heaviness. And the Egyptians said, Let me run away from the Israelites, because the Lord is fighting for them against the Egyptians.
Thank you. And let me invite Rich Kramer, would you like to read beginning at verse 26? And you'll have to unmute, Richard.
Thank you. Then the Lord said unto Moses, Hold out your arm over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, and upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. Moses held out his arm over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state, and the Egyptians fled at its approach. But the Lord hurled the Egyptians into the sea. The waters turned back and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Pharaoh's entire army that had followed after them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the Israelites marched through the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. Thus the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea. And when Israel saw the wondrous power which the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. They had faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses.
Thank you. Let me invite Mark Thompson. Would you like to begin reading at the very start of chapter 15?
I had a feeling you were going to ask me to do this one. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to Adonai. They said, I will sing to Adonai, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. Adonai is my strength and might. He has become my deliverance. This is my God, and I will enshrine him, the God of my father, and I will exalt him. The Lord, the warrior, Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea, and the pick of his officers are drowned in the sea of reeds. The deeps covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the foe. In your great triumph, you break your opponents. You send forth your fury. It consumes them like straw. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The flood stood straight like a wall. The deeps froze in the heart of the sea. The foe said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will bear my sword, my hand shall subdue them. You made your wind blow, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the majestic waters. You want someone else to continue? I'm going to keep on going.
Well, you could sing the next line.
Mark, I just want to ask, I'm interrupting, God forgive me, that you should sing. Some part of this has to have a melody hooked into it. Would you-
Yeah, I definitely could do Mika Mocha at some point, right?
I just want to hear your voice against the teeny bit. So any verse you can sing, oh, it would be so wonderful.
Okay,
Here.
I'll go into Mika Mocha.
Right?
Mika Mocha Elohim Adonai, Mika Mocha Nedar Bakodesh, Nora Tehilot, Osefele, Osefele.
Thank you so much, Mark.
All right.
Beautiful. Thank you. Let me invite Jackie and Tom. Would you like to begin reading with verse 11? What Mark has just so beautifully sung for us.
Are we unmuted?
Do we have to read after Mark?
Tough act to follow. Who is like you, Adonai, among the celestials? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, working wonders? You put out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your love, you lead the people you redeemed. In your strength, you guide them to your holy abode. The peoples hear, they tremble. Agony grips the dwellers in Philistia. Now are the clans of Edom dismayed. The tribes of Moab, trembling grips them. All the dwellers in Canaan are aghast. Terror and dread descend upon them. Through the might of your arm, they are still as stone. Till your people cross over, Adonai. Till your people cross whom you have ransomed. You will bring them and plant them in your own mountain, the place you made to dwell in, Adonai. The sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands established, God will reign forever and ever. For the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and riders went into the sea, and God turned back on them the waters of the sea. But the Israelites marched on dry ground in the midst of the sea.
Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, picked up the hand drum, and all the women went out after her, dancing with hand drums. And Miriam chanted for them, sing to the Eternal, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. They were put to the test.
Then Moses caused.
Then Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went into the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. They came to a marsh, but they could not drink the water of Moriah because it was bitter. This is why they called it Mara. And the people had grumbled against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? So he cried out to the Eternal, and the Eternal showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There, God made for them a fixed rule. They were put to the test. If you will heed the Eternal your God diligently, doing what is upright in God's sight, giving ear to God's commandments and keeping all God's laws, then I will not bring you upon any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am eternal, I am your healer.
And why don't you just finish reading the next verse?
All righty. And they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped beside the water.
Thank you so much, both of you. Mark Levenstein, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at the very start of chapter 16?
Thank you. Setting out from Elim, the whole Israelite community came to this wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. In the wilderness, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread, for you had brought us out into this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death." And Adonai said to Moses, "I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may test them to see whether they will follow my instructions or not. But on the sixth day, when the portion that they have brought in, it shall prove to be double the amount they gather each day." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "By evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out from the land of Egypt. In the morning you shall behold the presence of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against the Lord. For who are we that we should grumble against us? Since it is Adonai," Moses continued, "who will give you flesh to eat in the evening and bread in the morning. To the full, because the Lord has heard the grumblings you utter against him. What is our part? Your grumbling is not against us, but against Adonai."
Thank you, Mark. Let me invite Robin. Would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 9?
Yes, thank you. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole Israelite community, advance toward Adonai, who has heard your grumbling." And as Aaron spoke to the whole Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there, in a cloud, appeared the presence of Adonai. Adonai spoke to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Speak to them and say, by evening you shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread, and you shall know that I, Adonai, am your God." In the evening, quail appeared and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a fall of dew about the camp. When the fall of dew lifted, there, over the surface of the wilderness, lay a fine and flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "This is the bread which Adonai has given you to eat. This is what Adonai has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you requires to eat, an omer to a person, for as many of you as there are. You shall each fetch for those in your tent."
Thank you so much, Robin. David and Susan, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 17?
Yes, thank you. The Israelites did so, some gathering much, some little. But when they measured it by the omer, anyone who had gathered much had no excess, and anyone who had gathered little had no deficiency. They had gathered as much as they needed to eat. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning." But they paid no attention to Moses. Some of them left of it until morning, and it became infested with maggots and stank. And Moses was angry with them.
Different translation. And they collected it morning by morning, each by what he eats. And when the sun was hot, it melted. And it was,
On the sixth day, they collected double bread, 2 times the omer for each one. And all the chiefs of the congregation came and told Moses. And he said to them, this is what Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke. Tomorrow is a ceasing, a holy Sabbath to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Bake what you bake and cook what you cook and leave what is left over for keeping until the morning. And they left it until the morning as Moses had commanded, and it did not stink, and there were no maggots in it. And Moses said, eat it today, because today is a Sabbath to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Today you won't find it in the field. 6 days you shall collect it, and on the 7th day is a Sabbath. There will not be any in it.
Thank you
And
both.
it was. On
Thank
the
you both
7th
so
day,
much. Let me invite Ruth, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 27?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Yet some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found nothing. And the Eternal One said to Moses, how long will you all refuse to obey my commandments and my teachings? Mark that it is the Eternal who, having given you the Sabbath, therefore gives you 2 days' food on the 6th day. Let everyone remain in place. Let no one leave the vicinity on the 7th day. So the people remained inactive on the 7th day. The house of Israel named it manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and it tasted like wafers and honey. Moses said, this is what the Eternal has commanded. Let 1 omer of it be kept throughout the ages, in order that they may see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out from the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put 1 omer of manna in it, and place it before the Eternal, to be kept throughout the ages. As the Eternal had commanded Moses, Aaron placed it before the pact to be kept. And the Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a settled land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. The omer is 1/10 of an ephah.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And if I could remind everyone to remain muted until have an opportunity to speak so we can avoid the background noise. We're now on chapter 17. And let me invite Justin. Would you like to read some verses?
The entire community of the children of Israel journeyed from the desert of Sin to their travels by the mandate of the Lord. They encamped in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. So the people quarreled with Moses, and they said, give us water that we may drink, Moses. And Moses said, may drink. Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? The people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses. And they said, why have you brought us up from Egypt to make me and my children and my livestock die of thirst? Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, what shall I do for this people? Just a little longer, and they will stone me. And the Lord said to Moses, pass before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take into your hand your staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I shall stand there before you on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people will drink. Moses did so before the eyes of the elders of Israel. He named the place Massah, testing, and Meribah, quarreling, because of the quarrel of the children of Israel, and because of their testing the Lord, saying, is the Lord in our midst or not?
Thank you so much, Justin. Let me invite Jay. Would you like to read beginning at verse 8?
Thank you, Rabbi. Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua,
pick some men for us and go out and do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Then whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But whenever he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hand grew heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sunset, and Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. Go on.
I'll finish up. Thank you. Then Adonai said to Moses, inscribe this in a document as a reminder and read it aloud to Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and named it Adonai Nisi. He said, it means hand upon the throne of Adonai. Adonai will be at war with Amalek throughout the ages. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in reading about it. I'd like to share with you a little bit of a focus study, and then we'll open it up for everyone to share whatever reflections, responses, thoughts you have about this week's Torah portion. And before going into the text of what I prepared on the study sheet, I want to begin by focusing on the graphic that I have at the very top of the study sheet, which is a painting by Jacob Lawrence. Jacob Lawrence was one of the great American painters. He lived from 1917 to the year 2000, and he chronicled in particular the African-American experience here in the United States. So let's focus on this image a little bit. And actually, I'd like to invite all of you just to share with all of us what you see happening there. What do you see in this image? So anyone have any particular responses to this painting by Jacob Lawrence, which he calls Forward? Just in terms of the narrative of what's happening in the painting, what's David? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Susan points out that it may be looking like they're about to cross the sea with the yellow flowing thing on the right. What I see is the male guy being pushed by a lady with what looks like a gun, and behind her is another lady with a child, and maybe more family members further back in the line. And so the story I'm seeing is the women are trying to bring the family to freedom, and they're pushing the guy to do his part of the work.
Okay, very good. Richard and then Mark.
I see Follow the Drinking Gourd.
Another song, okay?
And that's, pardon me?
Yeah, another song.
Yes, and this is The Road to Freedom. And this portion is so much about water. And when they parse for water, when they're thirsty, they complain and complain and complain. And to me, the water has always been about the heavens above, about the Spirit of God, which women bring to us. You said that Moses was drawn out of the water, and here God has drawn us out of the gulf between Mitzrayim and freedom. And we don't appreciate it. We quibble. And later, when Miriam dies, the water dries up again. And every time he has to give a miracle, and God says, ultimately, no more miracles. You got to deal with this, sit down and talk. Listen to the women. That's what I see in that picture.
Thank you. And Mark Levinstein?
When I first downloaded this and saw it, it said, why is Rabbi showing us a picture of a bunch of women who have found some guy guilty of something that he's terribly ashamed of, and they're getting rid of him at gunpoint? That was, and then I started looking at the context, and I got more of a feeling of what's already been discussed.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Gary?
So what?
it says another kneels in prayer on the bottom of what you.
Let me just have Gary Roberts first, Jay, and then I'll come back.
Okay. Oh, Gary, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So what I find interesting is that the name of the painting is forward, but the person in the rear is looking behind. And so I assume that it looks like she is looking behind out of fear to make sure no one is following them, or perhaps there's more to it than that, is to just remember what they're fleeing from. I can't put my finger on it. There's a reason that this person is looking behind as everyone else is moving forward.
That's Amalek.
Sorry?
That's Amalek behind there. And the message is, we didn't circle our troops behind the widow and the orphan. We forgot to do that. That's why he was picking them off from in back.
Thank you both. That's excellent. Everyone's saying excellent things. Let me, Jay, Iser.
Well, definitely, this is a effort of persons who are going to somewhere where it's unknown, it's possibly treacherous, very foreboding. The figure in front is in a classic defensive stance. It's not that he doesn't want to see, but he's protecting his vital, his head, his brain, his eyes as he looks forward, and protects himself as best he can from, any other attacks. And there's a need, there's a necessity for these people to be going where they're going. Something is driving them, and it's no turning back, so to speak. That's what I see in it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jay. Other responses to the image? Ruth?
Well, I see, just my initial impression was that the artist is emphasizing the importance of women in the story. Like, maybe the men are hesitant because it's a pretty scary situation, but the women are so determined to be free and make it through that they'll just push them on. Like, go, it's like it's an emergency, go, they're pushing, even though it's scary, you gotta go. So the women are like really central to the quest for freedom. That's what I get.
Thank you, Ruth. Anna, you?
Well, I'm seeing that the two women in the middle are focused forward. The man in the front is like turning away. When you feel pain, you jerk away from it generally. And he's got his whole body arched backwards, although it looks like the flow of the pain he's walking forward. The man in the back, and I think he's the man because he doesn't have his shoulders and chest covered like the women do, he's looking back crouched in fear. But the picture is all about movement. The background is all flowing. It's all moving. It's earth. It looks like it's flowing like water.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom. And let me again, please request those who are not speaking right now, if you could mute so we can minimize the background noise. Go ahead, Tom.
So I see me at the front of the pack there, and I'm, as usual, oblivious to everybody behind me. And, I just came from Egypt. I came from hell. And I want to, but God, it's scary. Maybe and like the guy in the back, maybe we should go back. It was really, really bad, but it's scary to do something new. And so I'll tune in next week and I'll tell you what I did.
Okay, very good. Any other reactions to the painting? So let me tell you a little bit more about this painting by Jacob Lawrence, which he calls Forward. So this is a painting in which the central character, the figure with a white dress or apron, who is in fact holding a gun, that's Harriet Tubman. Okay. So a little bit about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery in, we don't know exactly when, somewhere between 1820 and 1822. And when she was 5 or 6 years old, she was rented out by her owner to a neighbor to serve as a domestic servant. And that began her actual period of working in servitude. And then in 1844, she entered into what we'll call a marital union with a man. As a slave, she couldn't legally marry, but she entered into that type of a relationship with a man named John Tubman. And John Tubman was actually a free black man. And within a few years after their marriage, in 1849, Harriet Tubman decided she was going to escape from slavery. They were living at the time in Maryland. And she was shocked and surprised to discover that her husband, John, didn't want to go. He refused. He said, I've got steady work. Why should I take my chances somewhere else when everything is kind of okay for me here? And he was actually also afraid to leave with her, because if he were caught with an escaping slave, then he himself could lose his free status and be sent into slavery, or perhaps be shot by those who were tracking them down. And so he said to Harriet, he said, if you leave, how are you going to know when it's nighttime which way is north? And what are you going to eat along the way anyway? And if you go, I'm gonna tell your owner that you left. She didn't believe him at first, but then the longer she looked into his eyes, she realized he was going to turn on her. So she left one night, escaped, made her way to Philadelphia. And once she was safe in Philadelphia, she then began to make contacts with abolitionists, and she then returned back to Maryland over and over again to help other slaves escape from slavery as well, including her mother and father. So that's a little bit of the story of Harriet Tubman. And so here, I too see what a number of you saw in this painting, which is the man. Perhaps this was inspired, that inspired Jacob Lawrence, the story about Harriet Tubman and her husband. We have this man here who, to me, seems reluctant to want to go, as Tom and Anna were both talking about. Someone who is resisting the idea of heading forward. And there is Harriet Tubman, gun in hand. Her movement is clearly forward, pushing forward. And then you have these other figures, and there seems to be some mixed, I would say, emotions about this whole journey. Someone holding what probably is a baby, looking forward, eager to move on. Then we have some figures in the back who are looking back either in fear, apprehension. So there seems to be a great deal of mixture of emotions about this whole notion about leaving slavery and heading towards freedom. So that's what we're going to focus on. What's in this painting is really what we're going to be focusing on in a little bit of focus study here, which I've entitled Going Forward. And the study itself is inspired, but we read at the very beginning of our Torah portion, which is here in number 1 on the study sheet, from verse 18 of chapter 13. And the children of Israel went up from Egypt, Hamushim. Now, in my edition, translates that word Hamushim as armed. So I don't know what it says in your Torah portion, but so this word Hamushim as armed or with weapons is kind of interesting, because Hamushim is based on the Hebrew word Hamesh, which means 5. So perhaps the notion of 5 ultimately becomes with weapons or armed, because maybe there's some way in which armies were divided into 5 sections or something like that. Not quite clear. But it's a very provocative word, and that's what generates a lot of commentary. And the first is from Rashi, which is really quite shocking. Rashi looks at this word Hamushim and relates it back to its root, Hamesh, 5, and he says, only 1 out of 5 departed from Egypt. So a little bit of what this study is about is when someone announces to us, hey, it's time to go. Are you fired up and ready to go? You ready to get on the freedom train and get out of this slavery thing? We like to think that all of us say, yeah, let me get on board. I'm ready to go. What this commentary is going to share with us and what this painting shares with us is maybe it's not so simple. Maybe, are you sure that you'd be ready to say, yeah, I'm all for it. I'm ready to go. Or might we be perhaps like Harriet Tubman's husband who said, well, I'm not so sure if it's better out there. I got a job and everything's kind of okay. And so that's what we're going to get into a little bit more deeply here. So some of the commentary actually is even more cynical and more pessimistic than even Rashi, who said, oh, only 1 out of 5 left. Some of these commentators are going to say it's even less than that. So let's look at number 2. This is from a Midrash Mechilta. Some say 1 in 50 left. Some say 1 in 500 left. Rabbi Nehorai says it was not 1 in 500 that went out, but fewer. What the Midrash is hinting at is maybe only 99% of the people stayed behind in slavery. Maybe only 1% left. How could that be? Why is it that someone, when they had the opportunity with Moses saying, time to go, why is it possible that so many could have remained behind? So let's look at the next Midrash from Midrash Shemot Rabbah, which says, there were sinners among the Israelites who had Egyptian patrons, and they lived in wealth and honor there and did not want to leave. So all this commentary is acknowledging that we like to think that when someone offers us the opportunity to get on the freedom train and leave, that we'd all do it. But it's acknowledging that there's something about the human character either has fear or is not willing to give up what they do have for the promise of something better, or who are only concerned about themselves and say, it's working for me, So it's fascinating that this great story about the Exodus from Egypt would produce so much commentary that is somewhat circumspect about how ready and eager everyone might be to head towards freedom. So I'd like to share with you another Midrash, which then will take us into a little bit of a Hasidic understanding about human psychology and psyche. So this is from the Midrash Pirkei Rabbeinu HaKodesh, which is also appears in the Jerusalem Talmud. And it says this at number 3. Our ancestors divided into 4 groups on the shore of the sea. One said, let's go into the sea. Another said, let's return to Egypt. Another said, let's make war on the Egyptians. And the 4th said, let us pray to God. So I'd like to share with you a little bit of a Hasidic commentary or understanding about what these 4 different groups might be saying and what another response might be. So this Hasidic tradition looks at this first group that says, let's go into the sea. And the Hasidic commentary says, that's a group that despairs of being able to achieve any real success in confronting the challenges of the world. And what they want to do is embrace themselves, if you will, cocoon themselves in a world of spirituality, where they don't have to deal with any of the challenges, problems of the world. And so they want to plunge into the sea of piety, of study, and a religious life. The second group, which is let's return to Egypt, the commentary says, this is the kind of person who's just completely submissive, who says, we can't do it. The odds are against us. This whole notion about an exodus, about journeying to a land of freedom is a nice dream, but it's completely unrealistic. And so there's nothing we can do against it. Let's just submit to the way the world is, and we'll just muddle our way through. Then we have the third group that says, let's make war on the Egyptians. So this is the group that says, well, one, it's wrong just to say you want to escape the world and not deal with the problems. Two, it's wrong just to submit to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to take on all those who are opposed to us, not just the Egyptians, but all those who are not ready to fight. This is a group that we've experienced within the Jewish tradition. These are a group that we would call fanatics. These are a group of people that we saw achieve some ignominy when Jerusalem itself was besieged by the Romans. And the zealots said, everyone who's not with us in fighting the Romans is against us. And they started to assassinate fellow Jews who were not, in their minds, fully committed to armed struggle against the Romans. So that's the third group. Then the fourth group, which says, let us pray to God. So this is a group that's interesting in this commentary that says, all three of the other groups are responding to their perceptions of material reality. And that's why you've all got it wrong. There's another dimension besides the dimension of reality, and that's the dimension that transcends this reality. And so what we need to do is we need to pray. The power of prayer can change everything. Interestingly enough, this Hasidic tradition rejects each one of these. It says, well, each one of these has, in its own time, in its own place, a valid particular perspective. But the appropriate response in this case is one, not to escape, not to submit, not to wage unrelenting war, and not to deal with our problems only on a spiritual level. What's the right way to deal with major obstacles when you face them? It's this, number 4, from our Torah portion, chapter 14, verse 15, where God says to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel that they shall go forward. This, in this Hasidic tradition, is the appropriate response. You just need to take one step forward. Move one step forward. Don't look up, look forward. As you look forward, take your step forward, you'll find yourself coming closer and closer to the goal that you've set for yourself. So this notion about going forward is indeed inspired by this painting by Jacob Lawrence, inspired by the story, the life of Harriet Tubman, who encountered within her own intimate family a reluctance to move forward. And there she is, encouraging all of us. She was characterized as the American Moses, to move forward, one step at a time. So with that, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts, reflections, responses to what we read in this week's Torah portion. Go ahead, Margot.
The parallel obviously makes me think about the eve of World War II, when some Jews have the foresight to leave, and those who were complacent, who stayed behind, who prayed and didn't go forward, ended up in the ovens.
Thank you, Margot. We just acknowledged Holocaust Remembrance. Yeah, thank you. So,
Yes, especially at this time of the year when with the Holocaust remembrance events.
thank you. Let me ask Richard, did you have something? Did you raise your hand? Richard Kramer?
Are you telling me?
That today I read that Biden is going to try and push through the $20 bill with Harriet Tubman's face on it.
Okay. She's really, her life story is really quite remarkable. So there was actually in a recent issue of the New Yorker magazine, a very fascinating story that included a story about Harriet Tubman. It was really about, I'm going to get her first name wrong, but it was the wife of William Seward, who was in Lincoln's cabinet. I want to say Martha, but I'm not sure if that's the right name. And the relationship that she had with Harriet Tubman. So it's a very interesting article. Go ahead, Susan, and then I'll come over to Ruth.
So just on that topic of Harriet Tubman, in 1961, we all had to do a term paper for history. And I chose to do mine on Harriet Tubman. And I spent about 2 months or more looking for material. There was one novel in the whole library system, the school library and the public library system in California, that dealt with Harriet Tubman. I could not get enough information.
Wow.
So that speaks to both how we thought of women and how we thought of Black people.
Thank you.
Now times have changed.
Thank you both. Ruth, did you want to share?
Yeah, yes, thank you. A couple things. I remember as a young person, there was one book about her life, and I remember reading it. I was very young, and I was so struck by that. But like Susan says, there was one book, and I didn't attempt a term paper. But just a couple of years ago, there was a major film made about her life, a Hollywood film. But I saw it; it was really beautifully done. It was tremendous and moving, and it really told her story. It was remarkable. So I'm glad that things changed, and now we have at least more about her and more to learn. But I relate to the story powerfully because it's kind of my family story. My dad was born in Mannheim, Germany, and when he was about 7.5, and the very beginning of 1933, the whole family left. Well, that's when it was the time to leave, because they could get out in the beginning of 33 when Hitler came to power. But it wasn't easy. And, I was always proud of them and grateful. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. But I don't know if I could have done it. I mean, they saw that they had foresight and they paid attention. But they had to leave a lot of the things that were comfortable and secure behind in order to do this, make a crazy, long, wandering voyage until they finally came to New York. It took years before they finally came to the U.S. So it can't have been easy. And I don't know if I could have. I don't know. I mean, I'd like to think I'd be brave and set out, but as I get older, I like my comforts too.
Thank you.
I like security. I like security also, So I don't know, but but I owe a lot because they had chutzpah, and they said they saw what was going to happen, and everyone thought a lot of people, I'm sure, thought they were nuts to leave. Like, why would you leave? You have so many things going well for you, and they did. Anyway, that was my family story.
Thank you. It's so special that you shared that with us. Gary?
So I'm looking at the concept of I'm taking this story personally. And so it always brings me back to my ongoing question is to why are we here, or why am I here? And I always come back to the concept of to grow. And for me, the way to grow is to keep moving forward. And I certainly find myself in comfort. I was comfortable this evening. I was ready to sit down and catch up on some Netflix stuff, but I thought, well, you know what? I think I'm going to come to Torah study tonight. And that's one way to keep putting one foot in front of the other, continuing to grow. And I think that's what I'm gaining from this, from this picture and from the discussion we're having. And I think that's one reason there is so much discussion about the concept of moving forward, because I know it's trite, but if you're not moving forward, then you're going backwards. And so I get a lot out of this.
Thank you. So, and I've gotten a lot out of what you just said, Gary. Thank you so much. Mark Thompson.
Hi. I've got a couple of issues I want to discuss. I'm really intrigued by the 4 groups, and I could almost make a case for the path of going forward applying to each of the 4 groups in a separate way. So I'm not sure that going forward has to be an alternative to the 4. It can be part of each of the 4. I can see how that can happen. And the other thing I wanted to touch on is the difference between let's go into the sea as an expression of pursuing a spiritual approach as opposed to let us pray. Because I think sometimes we confuse the two. We think if we're praying, we're being spiritual. So I wanted to talk about, well, what is the difference between spirituality and prayer? I'd like to just hold that out to the group.
You want to say something about that because you've thought about it. So share a little bit more.
Well, it seems to me that in spirituality, it can be much more of a passive experience. In many cases, I'm thinking of, a Buddhist, who's willing to accept things as they are, as opposed to prayer, which seems to be more of an active, a volitional act. So I'm thinking that could be the difference, but I'm curious to see what other people might say about that as well.
Fabulous. Okay. And Richard?
Yes, about that topic, I think of, I wrote something on this, on the website there, but what's not mentioned, what is not in the chapter, but is in Midrash, is a story about Nahshon. There is one fellow who went in. Nobody would get in the water until Nahshon jumped in. And he kept walking and he kept walking, and the water came higher and higher and higher. And when it got to his mouth, then it parted. And he was one who went in, he had faith. And about prayer being passive, I think of this prayer as prayer of petition that's being talked about. We're going to wait and ask God for help. As opposed to a spirituality like Zen or like Kabbalah, where you're so open that you get rid of your ego. You're just there with all your deficits. And then you lay up against the ground of being, and it does its work for you and uses your organs and your abilities to make a nicer world, as opposed to taking your little portion away. And I see that's what we're fighting when we come out of whatever it is, capitalism or egotism or whatever, to try and work together. If we all surrender and let go of our grasping, then maybe we'll find a way to work together. And we've all been, not all of us, but many people on one side of the aisle and say, oh, now the witch is gone. We're good to go now. But they're still erupting. We're still fighting. And maybe that's what is going on in civilization. And that's why we're here, to learn the wisdom of that's what goes on. And if we could really listen to one another, not just reload to argue, then maybe we could give God the picture of his abundant glory that he's asking us to mirror rather than break off and do our little piece. And so I think he's right that something could be, everybody is trying to unite these 4 pieces within us to move forward, as Nahshon did. He said, no, I'm going forward. The only thing I can do is go forward. If I drown, I drown, but I'm not going back there because I'm for freedom. I'm not for slavery. If I'm slave to God, and who is this Pharaoh? He's holding himself up as God, and it's the Tower of Babel all over. He wants to be the king of everything, as our unconscious wants to. And God is having this contest with him. No, you can't do that. And yet God is really, he's sorry to see this happen to this fellow. He's angry at us when we cheer that Pharaoh's dead. No, if you're cheering that your enemy is dead, then you've taken the place of king rather than had humility and move forward with your fellow people and engaged in the thou relationship rather than an I relationship.
Thank you.
So that's what I get out of this portion.
Thank you, Richard. And Anna, did you have something to share?
Well, in honor of Tu B'Shvat and my fruit farming roots, I have to say the verse that jumped out and kissed me on the cheek tonight was chapter 15, verse 17, which says, "You will bring them and plant them in your own mountain, the place you made to dwell in, eternal one." Now, this is planting. So thinking of planting, and when you plant, not plant on the mountain, but plant in the mountain. When you dig a hole for something and you prepare the ground for the roots, you fluff the soil up and you add amendments to it and make sure you have a nice, big, comfortable place for the roots to grow. And without being planted in the ground, there's nothing above the ground. If the roots aren't tended and provided for and cared for, there's no stock, there's nothing to burn for wood, there's no bud, there's no flower, there's no fruit, and there are no leaves. It's all invisible to us. It's underground. I mean, as it stands on here, because we all know. But I think there's a spiritual part of that, which is Rabbi is saying about going forward, and the message is to go forward. So I always think of Lech Lecha, go forward. The Lamed ascends up and the Kuf Sofit ascends down. So whenever someone sits forward, I also think reaching up to God and reaching deep into the earth. So I think on these four points, let's go into the sea. You know, the root can't live without water. Plant can't live with water. Let's return to Egypt. We have to have soil. Let's make war on the Egyptians. Let's fight our way past those rocks and get to where the going's good. And let's pray to God. And God willing, we can all grow up and bloom in peace.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. And anyone else who hasn't had an opportunity to share, I invite you at this time. So let me just say, David, did you want to share?
Just want to quickly say that Mark's pointing out that a way of looking at a distinction between prayer and spirituality, and oversimplifying prayer seems a little either active or volitional or having to do with ego, and the spirituality more passive. I just wanted to say I find that very provocative, and thank you for giving me something to cogitate on.
Well, you've all given me something to cogitate on, and let me, as an expression of appreciation, just share this fact to you, which is, this is Tu B'Shvat, and one of the traditional things to do on Tu B'Shvat is to have a Tu B'Shvat Seder, which was launched by the Kabbalists in Tzfat. And what the Tu B'Shvat Seder does is it takes us through not just the 4 seasons, but through the 4 worlds that in Kabbalah constitutes the entire universe. And I'm reminded also that during our Passover Seder, when we celebrate this moment, we have 4 cups of wine. So there may be something about how the need to bring all 4 elements together in order to move forward. So I thank you very much for helping me to move forward. I'm so grateful to be moving forward with all of you. And I want to thank you for coming together in immersing ourselves in words of Torah. God bless you all. Look forward to seeing you and studying with you next week. Be well, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.